If you're on the brink of retirement, picking the right withdrawal rate might be making your head spin. But one question that I might ask to help with your decision making is, do you want more spending capacity early in your retirement years or later in your retirement years? If you've been watching this channel, you know that we've been trying to dissect Dave Ramsey's comments about an 8% withdrawal rate. And our first couple of back tests on this particular topic, we came to the conclusion that it is pretty much a coin flip whether or not an 8% withdrawal rate is going to be successful throughout the duration of a 30-year time horizon. However, I did have some folks comment in the videos that Dave was talking about a fixed 8% withdrawal, not an 8% starting withdrawal rate. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the differences between the fixed withdrawal percentage and a starting withdrawal percentage adjusted for inflation. We're going to then backtest the last 30 years for a 60-40 portfolio and then a portfolio that's 95% in stocks. And then I'm going to talk about 3 reasons why a fixed percentage could actually make sense over and above an adjusted for inflation withdrawal strategy. Let me first introduce myself before we jump in. My name is Kevin Lau. I'm the host of the Planning for Retirement podcast, and I'm also the owner and financial planner at Imagine Financial Security. We help individuals over 50 who have at least $1 million saved to maximize their retirement income, minimize their lifetime tax bill, and worry less about money. If this describes you, make sure to hit the subscribe button and make sure to follow our podcast. We're putting out weekly retirement-related content specifically designed for you, PFR Nation. Okay, so first, why don't we talk about the differences between a fixed percentage and a starting withdrawal rate of 8%. At a very high level, the 8% starting rate of withdrawal is just that. So let's first assume that we are talking about a $2 million portfolio. 8% of $2 million is $160,000. And that would be your withdrawal in year 1. That's when you throw out 8%. 8% doesn't matter going forward. Most likely you're going to be invested in some kind of portfolio with a mix of stocks and bonds, maybe some real estate in there. And let's say year 2, inflation was 3%. Well, in that case, what you would do is you would give yourself an inflation raise of 3%. So instead of taking out $160,000, you would increase that withdrawal by $4,800, which is 3% of $160K. And that gives you $164,000 and some change in year 2. That is the starting rate of withdrawal. And this was really the same method that was famously made popular by Bill Bengen in the 4% rule, which stated that if you start with a 4% year 1 rate of withdrawal and then you adjust that for inflation over time throughout the duration of your retirement, there was never a period of time where the portfolio was depleted after 30 years. And that still holds up true in today's world. With an 8% fixed starting rate, year 1, same thing. We are going to start with a $160,000 withdrawal. Okay, but let's say you were invested relatively aggressively. Maybe you had a mix of 70% stocks and 30% bonds, and after the first full year, your portfolio dropped. And let's say it dropped by 10%. So now you've taken out $160K and your portfolio dropped by 10%. You might have somewhere in the neighborhood of about $1,656,000 after year 1. So what you would then do is apply that same 8% to that amount, not $2 million. So in this case, in year 1, you'd be withdrawing $132,000 and some change in year 2. Very important differences. Fixed percent, that is the same percentage you're going to withdraw from your portfolio, and your withdrawal amount is going to fluctuate based on the value of the market, whereas a starting withdrawal rate of, let's say, 8% or some other starting percentage will start at that amount, and then each year you're going to give yourself an inflation raise based on what the cost of living was that particular year. So which is superior? As always, it depends. It depends on your life expectancy. It depends on what market forces are in play during your retirement. It depends on what your ultimate goals are for financial legacy, if that is important to you, and so many other factors: risk tolerance, risk capacity, other income sources, taxes. The list goes on and on. But why don't we backtest both of these withdrawal strategies? And again, we're going to use 8% as a starting withdrawal just because I want to compare this to the Dave Ramsey's comments when he talked about an 8% withdrawal rate in retirement. In this first backtest, we are going to look at the starting withdrawal amount of $160,000, which again is 8% of $2 million. So again, $160,000, and we're going to inflate that each year with inflation. We're going to adjust that with inflation each and every year, okay? And we're going to take this out as long as possible. Ignore this. That would be cheating. And we are going to see how this plays out with two different portfolios. One is going to be the traditional portfolio, 60-40, 60% in stocks, 40% in bonds, globally diversified, okay, between U.S. and international stocks, as well as international bonds in addition to U.S. bonds. And then we're also going to backtest this with the other portfolio, a more aggressive approach. I would say a very aggressive approach of 95% in stocks and about 5% in fixed income as that cash buffer. And let's see what happens here. We're not going to have to go very far because both scenarios, in both instances, the portfolios actually are depleted in 2016. Kind of a funny coincidence there. With a portfolio that's 60% in stocks versus 95% in stocks, the portfolio was depleted the same exact year. Now, why does this happen? Really, what you're going to see is that the portfolio runs into two significant downturns in the first roughly 12, 13 years of retirement. In the beginning, things were going just fine. Okay, we had returns 4 years in a row in the positive, double digits, mind you, in the positive rates of return. But then we had the tech sell-off, we had the tech bubble bursting in the early 2000s, and we had 3 consecutive years of negative returns. Now, the portfolio I'm referring to up here, this is the more aggressive portfolio, but even the portfolio that was 60-40 also experienced 3 years of consecutive decline. And even though we experienced 4 positive years early on in retirement, we're going to be adjusting these cash flows each and every year with inflation. Okay, so whatever that inflation rate is that is applied to this column here is going to increase the cash flows that are paid out in that other column. And ultimately what you'll see is that the balance actually does go up, but then once the tech bubble bursts, portfolio value goes down, but the withdrawals still go up, and therefore the portfolio goes down and doesn't really recover. Certainly it did recover a little bit, but then 2008, you can see, then the market crash, we had the Great Recession of 08, 09, and then things really started to fall out of favor, and the portfolio was depleted again in the 21st year of retirement in both scenarios. Obviously not an ideal situation, and that's why we've looked at all of those 30-year rolling periods using the 8% starting rate of withdrawal. And I'm going to emphasize starting rate of withdrawal because, like I said, there were some YouTube commenters out there that said, no, Dave Ramsey said fixed 8%. I don't know what his comments truly mean because I haven't really seen anything that specifically states a fixed 8% versus a starting 8%. So we're going to look at both. So why don't we now transition to look at the 8% fixed rate and see how different this scenario plays out. So again, we're looking at a $2 million portfolio. We're going to just simply withdraw 8% annually, and we're going to adjust that for inflation each and every year. And we're going to take that through 2025. We're going to use the same portfolios, the 60-40 portfolio and the 95-5 portfolio, again, globally diversified, both in equities and fixed income. Let's start with the 60-40 portfolio, okay? What you'll notice is that, similar to the other scenario we looked at, we see 4 years of positive returns. And as a result, the cash flows increased each and every year. The cash flows actually in year 4 topped out at $215,000 as a rate of withdrawal, as a withdrawal dollar amount. And, you know, that's much higher than the starting rate of withdrawal of $160,000 using 8% of $2 million. As you can see right away, positive market performance really plays into favor of giving yourself those raises. But then what happens is that we go through the dot-com bubble bursting. We had 3 consecutive years of downturn. And as a result, the cash flows decreased. Okay. But, you know, if you look, 2003, if you look at 2003, we're pretty much right along where we started. So really, you kind of started with that 8%. If you look at that as a starting rate of withdrawal, and you had some nice years where you gave yourself a raise, maybe you didn't even need the raise, but you still took the money out of your portfolio because you're following this 8% fixed withdrawal rate. You could maybe put that in the bank, put that in your cash buffer, put that in a money market account or a high yield savings account and use it for a rainy day when things go south, which they did in the early 2000s for this individual. Okay. But again, we're kind of right around that starting rate of withdrawal of about $160,000, even 8 or 9 years in to this withdrawal strategy, to this retirement. So overall, not a bad outcome despite going through an early downturn. Now, when we fast forward, obviously we know what's coming. We have the Great Recession here in 2008, and even a 60-40 portfolio that was still not immune. This portfolio still dropped by 23% in 2008. Now you're going to see a significant drop in income that year because, again, the portfolio value went down, and we're going to apply that 8% of a much lower portfolio value. Again, we're looking at about $1.3 million as opposed to $2 million. So this will significantly impact the amount of money that is coming out of the portfolio because of the Great Recession of 2008. And as you can see, the income never really recovers back to that $160,000 level. But ultimately, 2025, a 60-40 portfolio is still sitting on $1.4 million, and they're probably going to take out somewhere in the neighborhood of about, $115,000, $120,000 in 2025. For some of you, may not be a bad outcome. Now let's fast forward and look at the 95-5 portfolio. Similar story, but more upside and more downside. As you can see, the portfolio withdrawals top out at $250K here in 1999, and then they go down significantly because of the dot-com bubble bursting, and we trend down and we bottom out at about $153,000 there in 2003, and then in 2008, boom, way down, $103,000 was the income in 2008. So again, if you can weather the storm, if you can stomach ups and downs in terms of how much income you're taking out of the portfolio, this scenario might be acceptable to you. Now, this was a little different because of that 95% in stocks after 2009, we saw a significant recovery in the market. You look at these rates of return, very friendly, positive 30% there in 2009, positive 25% in 2013, positive 22% in 2017, positive 26% in 2019, 16, 18%, 21, 16, 19. We've had significant positive returns in the double digits since that Great Recession of 2008, 2009. So as a result, the income has experienced an uptick and recovered not fully back to the 160 starting amount, but about $146,000 in 2024, and probably, truthfully, right around, look at the portfolio value of $2 million, probably coming back to $160,000 in 2025. Now, at first glance, you might be thinking, you know what, Kevin, the 8% fixed percentage, that is a no-brainer over and above that 8% starting withdrawal rate, which I wouldn't disagree in this situation, okay? But many times, you may not be starting with that 8% withdrawal rate like we're looking at here, okay? Because, again, it's kind of been a coin flip. If you look at all the rolling periods, starting from the 90s, it's been kind of a coin flip in terms of 50% have been successful after 30 years, 50% unsuccessful after 30 years. But you need to look at the cumulative withdrawals that has been experienced by each scenario, okay? Now, if you look at this scenario here, the blue line, this is that 95-5 portfolio with that fixed percentage withdrawal. As we looked at in the graph, this went up pretty significantly early on, and then it took a nosedive and didn't really recover back to that $160,000 level really ever. I mean, maybe this year, maybe year 30, what we're looking at here is maybe it's going to recover back to that $160,000 level. But if you adjust that for inflation, $160,000 is going to feel a lot less than $160,000 did back in 1996. Look at the 60-40 portfolio with that 8% fixed starting withdrawal rate. Early on, it experienced those increases, but then the withdrawals went down drastically because of the dot-com bubble bursting. And then we had, of course, the Great Recession that hit in 2008. Okay. Whereas that fixed withdrawal amount in year one and then adjust that for inflation every year, as you can see, this is just a steady eddy, no movement here, and then significantly higher in terms of income after that 6 years, 7 year, 8 year period. But as you can see, this portfolio only lasted 21 years, which may not be acceptable for many of you watching this video. So just for fun, if we look at the cumulative withdrawal amounts after 21 years, if we want to compare each of these scenarios, we're going to do that right down here. 8% starting withdrawal and then adjusting for inflation every single year. That portfolio withdrew about $4.1 million throughout the duration of that retirement. The 60-40 portfolio with a fixed percentage, that portfolio withdrew about $3.2 million throughout the duration of retirement. Again, 21 years. And then the 95-5 portfolio, after 21 years, this individual extracted $3.3 million from the portfolio, again, after 21 years. So if you compare those three, You look at this and say, well, you know what? This scenario here is superior because we took more money out in that time horizon, in that 21-year period. But if you retired 60, that takes you up to about 81 years old. If you're still living at 81, now you're just living off Social Security and maybe a pension if you're lucky. So again, this is why that may not be acceptable. This is why a starting withdrawal of 8% and then adjusting that for inflation each and every year is typically not going to result in success. But the good news is, if you kind of think about the context of when you're going to need income in retirement, if we sort of break this down into 3 distinct phases, we typically will have the go-go years early on in retirement, maybe that first 10 years or so. Then we might slow it down a little bit for the next 10. We might be in the slow-go years here. And then finally, we may be in the no-go years towards the end of retirement. And certainly you could argue in your no-go years, you have a much higher likelihood of needing long-term care or having a healthcare event that costs a lot of money, but you're probably not going to be taking those bucket list trips. You're probably not going to be going to Scotland or St. Andrews to play golf at 91. If you are, good on you. Okay, that is amazing. But most likely you're going to be taking those trips in your 50s, 60s, or 70s when you still have health on your side. So from a spending standpoint, it may make sense to look at what is the max spend during that first 10 years of retirement. So just for fun, I wanted to see what that cumulative withdrawal amount was after 10 years. So let's look down here. After 10 years of withdrawals, pretty much identical across the board. We had about 1.8 million down here, with the starting rate of withdrawal of 8%, adjusting that for inflation every single year. Then we had $1.7 million for the 60-40, and then about $1.8 million for the 95-5 with that starting or that fixed 8% withdrawal. So pretty much across the board, we had a very similar experience in terms of income coming out of the portfolio. Obviously, it's market dependent. With that fixed percentage, you're going to see some ups and downs with your withdrawals, and even more so if you're 95% in stocks and only 5% in bonds versus a 60-40 portfolio. But there are trade-offs here that you certainly should be considering as you are approaching retirement in terms of how much can I take out of my portfolio reasonably and for how long. So why might a fixed percentage withdrawal actually might be superior over a starting withdrawal that is adjusted for inflation each and every year? The first thing I'll point out is you want embedded guardrails built into your withdrawal strategy. We've talked about guardrails before, which essentially gives you parameters in terms of when you should maybe cut your spending depending on market factors versus when you might want to increase your spending based on positive market factors. So very simple math. If the market goes up, the amount you take out goes up. If the market goes down, the amount you take out goes down as well. And it depends on how much risk tolerance you might have in terms of what type of allocation you might select. Is it more in stocks? Is it less in stocks? And finding that sweet spot that aligns with your goals, your needs is super important. The second reason is you have the capacity to adjust spending. Maybe 30 or 40 or even 50% of your actual expenses in retirement are discretionary as opposed to non-discretionary. Maybe you're taking 10 or 11 or 12 golf trips on an annual basis, and therefore if the market goes down, maybe you only go on 3 or 4 that year. If you have that capacity to adjust your spending throughout retirement, you're a better candidate for doing a fixed percentage as opposed to a starting withdrawal amount that is adjusted for inflation every year. That's not super flexible. Number 3, you want your cake and eat it too. What I mean by that is you're going to prioritize preserving your portfolio. You don't want to burn through all of your assets, but you also want essentially permission. You want permission to spend a little bit higher early on in those go-go years, knowing that over time your spending needs, especially on the discretionary side, might go down. So doing that fixed percentage is going to allow you to start with maybe 7 or 8 or 9% early on, which gives you that additional income versus a 4 or 5% starting withdrawal percentage. But it also ensures that your portfolio will last as long as you live, because as long as you have a fixed percentage, you're never going to deplete your portfolio fully. Now, your income may go down over time. However, you're going to accept that because that may happen in your slow go or no go years when your spending needs might go down anyways. Just word of caution there, though. However, if you have a long-term care need, if you have higher expenses at the end of retirement, you want to make sure you're not a burden on your loved ones. So there is a happy medium there in terms of overstarting with that fixed percentage if you do want to aggressively spend down in your go-go years. I hope you guys found this helpful. If you did, hit the like button. It allows us to help more people, reach more people, so we appreciate that. And of course, listen, if you are in a situation where you're planning for retirement and you're trying to figure out, hey, what is an appropriate withdrawal rate for me? How much can I reasonably spend in retirement, but also achieve my legacy goals and also protect against a need for long-term care? This is what we do day in and day out. And if you're interested in learning more about how to work with our firm, you can visit our website at www.imaginefinancialsecurity.com, or you can start with the retirement readiness questionnaire that is linked in the description below. We'd love to hear from you and see how we can help you plan for and execute a successful retirement. Thanks so much for tuning in. Until next week, I'll see you then.